With over 732 million monthly active users, TikTok is a platform that, regardless of your thoughts on its overall quality, you have to admit is very popular. In passing, it's a perfectly innocent, albeit asinine platform to share short videos, typically centered around dances, challenges, lip syncing, and other attempts to win the approval of internet strangers. So, in many ways, the platform isn't all that different from its competitors. Like Vine, it's fast-paced and gamified. Like Instagram, companies pay popular users to advertise their products. Like Facebook, it allows people to make a living from hypnotic little videos. Unlike these companies, TikTok may be feeding your personal data to the Chinese Communist Party. In this video, I'll be discussing the origins and history of TikTok, some of the concerns regarding the platform, its popularity, and trying to answer this central question: is TikTok social media at its worst? Douyin, which is the Chinese equivalent of what we know as TikTok, launched all the way back in the much celebrated year of 2016. Owned by parent company ByteDance, a technology company founded by software engineer Yang Yiming, the platform's fun and quirky content proved remarkably popular, earning over 100 million Chinese users within its first year. Wanting to capitalise on success, the product was quickly brought to an international market. Merging with not at all suspiciously similar platform Musical.ly in 2018, TikTok was officially worldwide. Having been downloaded an estimated 2 billion, yes, 2 billion times since its release, TikTok currently ranks 6th in terms of daily active users, following Facebook, YouTube, WhatsApp, Instagram, Messenger, if you can call that social media, and WeChat. And if research is to be believed, TikTok has recently taken the top spot for average time spent per user on platform in both the UK and US market, which all sounds rather impressive, though, as you already likely know, TikTok isn't without its detractors and certainly not immune to controversies. Up until 2020, those living in China were able to download and use both Douyin and TikTok, though in a move completely at odds with the Chinese Communist Party's usual cultural openness, the company was ordered to prohibit the use of overseas versions of the platform. Taking strict measures to prevent Chinese citizens access to outside TikTokery, what is known as the Great Firewall of China's blocking measures included adopting an IP lock zone, blocking mainland registered phone numbers, and node blocking, whatever that means. Now, at this point, it's probably worth taking a moment to briefly explain this a little further for those who aren't familiar with what I'll broadly term Chinese censorship. Unlike in the West, where we have at least a theoretical right to say whatever the hell we want, whether that's support of marginal political causes or criticism of governments, Beijing, China's political capital, isn't so keen on that sort of thing. In fact, according to Amnesty International, China proudly boasts the, quote, largest recorded number of imprisoned journalists and cyber dissidents in the world, and, as mentioned previously, the Great Firewall of China, perhaps the most sophisticated censorship mechanism ever designed, restricts not only access to TikTok, but also to a huge number of other popular websites available elsewhere, including Wikipedia, YouTube, and Google, essentially creating China's very own contained and isolated internet. Now, I should point out, it's not as if internet censorship, and indeed censorship in general, doesn't happen elsewhere. It does, and probably more often than you may assume, but the scale and extent to which it happens under the careful watch of the CCP is what sets it apart. As well as being briefly banned in Indonesia, Bangladesh and Pakistan, the platform is also officially unavailable in India, the biggest market outside of China, home to just shy of 1.4 billion people. The Indian government publicly stated that the decision to ban the app was to protect the data and privacy of its citizens, concerns that became significantly more global when 3 months after, in August 2020, beloved children's entertainer and chess Grand High Wizard Donald Jimothy Trump launched his own crusade against the company. On the 6th of August 2020, Captain Trump signed 2 executive orders potentially banning US TikTok should it not be sold by ByteDance to an American company, citing, quote, credible evidence that TikTok's parent company might take actions that threaten to impair the national security of the United States. Some highly credible journalists, suggested that the executive orders were actually retaliation for anti-Trump sentiment present on the platform, in particular a prank pulled by which TikTok enthusiasts reserved seats at a Trumpton rally and, get this, didn't go. But this kind of clickbait explanation, at least in my opinion, oversimplifies a complex and largely unprecedented situation, and though this is hardly representative of much of the tenor of public discussion, there's still plenty about the company that people don't seem to realise. If something is free, you're the product. First stated by the American artist Richard Serra back in 1973, decades before the ubiquity of the internet, this prophetic statement is undoubtedly a good rule of thumb when understanding the exchanges we enter into when using social media accounts. Just like Facebook, Instagram, Google, and all the other platforms we know and love, TikTok makes its money by attracting a huge number of people to its service. Then they have businesses pay them to put advertisements in front of their eyeballs. Pretty straightforward, right? Well, not exactly. Along with millions or even billions of users comes data, lots of it, from IP addresses to purchasing habits, browsing data, and biometric information. These platforms essentially collect as much dirt on you as the law will allow, and sometimes a bit more. For the most part, these US-based companies use all that data to shove crap down your throat. Google, why is my arse so itchy? Soon enough you'll be seeing adverts for hypoallergenic soap. Ask Siri, why is my anus bleeding? Rectal cream adverts. Inquire with Alexa about where to buy a new hamster, soon enough, the RSPCA will be knocking at your door. The sad truth is, as a culture, we're used to this kind of exchange. Sure, it's creepy, but it's also expected, and for the large part, we know that our data isn't being exploited too badly. Sure, there are quite a few notable exceptions, but with regards to TikTok, this isn't necessarily true. As previously noted, the Douyin and TikTok platforms are largely the same, but separate. One for China and one for everyone else. With Douyin, servers dedicated to dealing with platform data are, as you would expect, located in mainland China, and similarly, servers and databanks dealing with data for TikTok are spread elsewhere across the world. Though TikTok has consistently stated that they, quote, have never provided user data to the Chinese government, nor would they do so if asked, former employees working out of the company's California offices have contested this claim, saying that not only are Beijing-based ByteDance employees able to access US data, but the boundaries between the companies were so blurry as to be, quote, almost non-existent. Add on top of this China's startlingly broad national intelligence laws, which require any organisation and citizen to support and cooperate in national intelligence work, as well as the Chinese Communist Party's close ties and, oh yes, direct investment in TikTok, concerns about national security and privacy begin to appear quite reasonable. Security analysts at Proton Mail had this to say about the issue, quote, the fact that TikTok is owned by a Chinese company, one that has explicitly said it would deepen its cooperation with the Chinese Communist Party, makes this excessive data collection, we'll touch on this later, even more concerning. The Chinese government has a history of strong-arming and co-opting Chinese tech companies into sharing their data and then using this data to intimidate, threaten, censor, or engage in human rights abuses. Although Count Trumpula's efforts to thwart the platform were ultimately unsuccessful, with newly incumbent child-sniffing President Joe Biden revoking the ban in June of 2021, the new administration did instead order the Secretary of Commerce to investigate the app to determine its threat to national security. It's also, at this point, worth noting a few examples regarding the extent and ethics with which data is being collected by the company. In February 2019, the US Federal Trade Commission, or FTC, fined ByteDance $5.7 million for collecting information from minors under the age of 13 in violation of the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act. A situation mirrored when the Dutch Data Protection Authority this year made the decision to impose a fine of €750,000 against TikTok for failing to provide an adequate explanation to users of how they collect, process, and use personal data. In addition to this, in February, the company also settled an Illinois-based $92 million class action lawsuit for having collected and shared the personal and biometric information of its users without obtaining proper consent. And sure, fines and lawsuits like this are again not something unique to TikTok. You could even argue that although these particular examples certainly don't paint TikTok in a good light, they are more indicators of a much larger issue endemic to technology companies, an issue that is usually termed surveillance capitalism, and you wouldn't be wrong. The model of draining as much data from users as possible is far too prevalent and far too accepted. But to answer the question of whether TikTok is social media at its worst, we're first going to have to take a look at the dark and rather depressing world of its content moderation. Sorry. Every platform has its own rules on what is and isn't acceptable. Often, these rules are relatively opaque, with public user agreements outlining the basics. No doxing, nothing sexually explicit, etc., etc. But then there are the internal guidelines, usually used by platform moderators to help make decisions on more borderline content, a prime example of which would be the policing of so-called hate speech. While two platforms might explicitly state that dreaded hate speech will not be tolerated, the same piece of content may indeed be deemed acceptable on Facebook, but not on Snapchat, or the reverse. Likewise, a platform may wish to boost certain content which is more family-friendly, while sheltering users from violence, controversial topics, or indeed anything which doesn't chime well with its advertisers. Hail to our Disney overlords. And though these documents are often closely guarded, or at very least not advertised, in the case of TikTok, we're lucky enough to have a little bit more insight, as in 2020, journalists at The Intercept managed to get their hands on a few of these documents, and what a pleasure they were to read. Reportedly handed down by ByteDance's Beijing headquarters to be obeyed by TikTok's many global offices, TikTok moderators were told to suppress content which featured users with, amongst other things, abnormal body shape, an obvious beer belly, or too many wrinkles, from making it to the app's For You recommendation page, which, if you didn't know, is essentially the front page of the app. As well as this, TikTok wished to avoid publicising those with eye disorders, growth disorders, dwarfism, facial scars, quote, crooked mouth disease, or other disabilities. Not stopping there, those with shabby or dilapidated housing and those featured in slums and rural fields were also deemed not suitable for promotion. All this from a company committed to a, quote, inclusive environment, I hear you ask. Well, it doesn't stop there. In another document, ByteDance also instructed TikTok to suppress and even ban users sharing political content, including, but certainly not limited to, the defamation or criticism of political or religious leaders, the quote uglification of countries' history, such as the Tiananmen Square incident, dancing in front of a mosque, or indeed quote threatening or trying to shame/degrade people on the basis of gender, race, beliefs, or disability. We also have clear examples of these policies being put into action. In 2019, a US teenager made headlines after having her account blocked following the publication of a video disguised as a makeup tutorial criticising Chinese authorities for their treatment of the Uyghur ethnic minority, a group who are widely acknowledged as facing significant oppression, forced sterilisation, systematic rape, and even internment in concentration camps, all allegations which the CCP unsurprisingly deny. Additionally, In an investigation by the Washington Post, the news outlet also found that at the time of the widely publicised pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong, a TikTok search for this topic yielded, quote, virtually zero content. Now, could this have been anything to do with the fact that these protests were in opposition to a new security law being imposed upon Hong Kong by mainland China? What are you, a conspiracy theorist? Get out of here with your tinfoil hat! There are several more examples that I could cite here, but the point I'm trying to make is that while TikTok may wish to present itself as fun, as wholesome, as a platform upon which hashtag inclusivity is truly valued, it is not and will never be. People might have fun on the platform. They might enjoy videos every single day. They might even make a very good living from doing wacky dances or performing magic tricks, or more likely than not, just by being simply very attractive. But regardless of this, at its heart, TikTok is an organisation with ambiguous intent. On one hand, I have no doubt that those tasked with building and developing the platform were trying to create something engaging and fun and that delivered value to its users. At the same time, the company, if only by virtue of its being headquartered in China, is also a tool of the Chinese Communist Party's international intelligence and security apparatus. And if you aren't convinced of that fact by now, let me present perhaps the most damning piece of evidence. As previously mentioned, TikTok is owned by ByteDance, a company founded by Chinese entrepreneur and technologist Yang Yiming, and alongside Douyin and TikTok, Yiming has also helmed many other platforms popular in China, including Neihan Duanzu. Launched in 2012 and boasting somewhere between 4 and 200 million users, yes, I know that's not very specific, this app was primarily for sharing humorous content and was extremely popular with users. That was up until 2018, when China's National Radio and Television Administration permanently shut it down, specifically citing the app's vulgar content. In response, Zhang Yiming released a public statement. One of protest, one of outrage perhaps. Well, not quite. Here are some of the highlights. I sincerely apologise to regulators, our users and colleagues. The platform has gone astray, posting content that goes against socialist core values. I will accept all punishment since it failed to direct public opinion in the right way. In the past, we have placed too much emphasis on the role of technology and failed to recognise that socialist core values are the prerequisite to technology. We need to spread positive messages in line with the requirements of the times while respecting public order and good practice. Just let that sink in for a moment. Socialist core values are the prerequisite to technology. The word mouthpiece comes to mind. Despite the company's protestations that the Chinese government exerts no influence over TikTok, given the laws, the dire consequences for not following those laws, the company's history of capitulating to the CCP, and not to mention, the CCP's investment, it's difficult to not feel at least some misgivings about the security, privacy, and ethics of TikTok. As with most things, The issue of whether or not to install and use TikTok comes down to a matter of personal choice. With so much of our technology, we expect it to be spying on us, and for some people, that really doesn't matter. For others, privacy is paramount, but neither perspective is the right perspective. It's a question of what you're willing to surrender in exchange for something you find valuable. Though the information I've detailed here is not exactly promoted to users just before they decide to hit accept on their user agreements, it isn't hidden either. It's common knowledge that powerful entities exploit social media to spread misinformation, to help massage their international image, to downplay their failures, to emphasize their successes, and to smear and disadvantage their opponents. It's all part and parcel of our increasingly hyper-connected world. From Russian troll farms sowing seeds of Western discontent to QAnon, there's a lot that can be done with technology and data which isn't in the interests of the people. TikTok, like the others, is guilty of making addicts of its users, of hypocrisy, and of political censorship. Unlike the others, TikTok is a company firmly in the pocket of likely the world's foremost authoritarian regime. Now, I'm not saying that the platform is specifically designed to harvest as much data as humanly possible on global populations as to advance the influence of the CCP and to aid them in some sort of future cyber war whereby which they ascend to cultural and economic hegemony. Well, I am a bit, but I would ask that before you hand over all your data and your attention to a company that works at the behest of a political party which imprisons portions of its own people in concentration camps and actively tries to silence those who speak out against it, ask yourself this: how could TikTok be any worse?